Hello everyone, so recently I've been training smithing and was thinking which method of smithing is better, ceremonial swords or burial armor. Ceremonial swords and burial armor can be made at Artisan's workshop to the east near the mining guild. This method of training is similar to normal smithing of smelting and forging, however, the items created are not kept but instead made purely for experience. As such, the typical method of smithing can be monotonous. Artisan's workshop can be a viable option when training for experience only or for max level. In order to determine which two methods of smithing in Artisan's workshop is better, we have to consider the experience rates and compare the two as a whole. First, let's take a look at ceremonial swords. When making ceremonial swords, a hammer, tongs, and ingot 4 is required to forge a sword. The forging process is done through a pop-up window interface where the top screen shows a picture of the sword needed to be made, while the bottom screen is used to recreate a copy of the top screen. Once completed, experience is given based on the performance quality of the sword in percentage. If a perfect score of 100% is achieved, an additional 20% bonus is added on top. At level 70 smithing, iron ceremonial swords can be made. One iron ingot of grade 4 requires 75 iron ores to make, and when perfecting the sword, 3,242 smithing experience is received at 120%. At 75 smithing, steel ceremonial swords can be made. A steel ingot 4 requires 40 iron ores and 80 coal to make, and when the sword is made perfect, 4,538 smithing experience is given at 120%. At 80 smithing, mithril ceremonial swords can be made. Mithril ingot 4 requires 30 mithril ores and 120 coal per bar, and a perfect score gives 5,446 smithing experience at 120%. At 85 smithing, adamant ceremonial swords can be made. One adamant ingot of grade 4 requires 25 adamantite ores and 150 coal, and a perfected sword gives 6,873 smithing experience at 120%. Lastly, at 90 smithing, rune ceremonial swords can be made. To make one rune ingot 4 requires 18 runite ores and 144 coal, and a perfect score gives 8,558 smithing experience at 120%. Now we move on to burial armor. There are 3 different levels of ingots for burial armor, which range from 1 to 3 and each use a specific amount of resource. The difference for ingot levels is that each higher grade uses more of the same resource to make the bar, but in return give more smithing experience. At level 30 smithing, iron burial armor can be made. Iron ingot 1 requires 1 iron ore to make and gives 101 smithing experience. Iron ingot 2 requires 9 iron ores to make and gives 202 smithing experience. Iron ingot 3 requires 12 iron ores to make and gives 240 smithing experience. At 45 smithing, steel burial armor can be made. Steel ingot 1 requires 1 iron ore and 2 coal to make and gives 131 smithing experience. Steel ingot 2 requires 4 iron ores and 7 coal to make and gives 253 smithing experience. Steel ingot 3 requires 9 iron ores and 17 coal to make and gives 354 smithing experience. At level 60 smithing, mithril burial armor can be made. Mithril ingot 1 requires 1 mithril ore and 4 coal to make and gives 164 smithing experience. Mithril ingot 2 requires 3 mithril ore and 12 coal and gives 316 smithing experience. Mithril ingot 3 requires 6 mithril ore and 24 coal and gives 404 smithing experience. At level 70 smithing, adamant burial armor can be made. Adamant ingot 1 requires 1 adamant ore and 6 coal to make and gives 278 smithing experience. Adamant ingot 2 requires 3 adamantite ore and 14 coal and gives 455 smithing experience. Adamant ingot 3 requires 4 adamantite ore and 22 coal to make and gives 568 smithing experience. Lastly, at 90 smithing, rune burial armor can be made. Rune ingot 1 requires 1 runite ore and 8 coal to make and gives 505 smithing experience. Rune ingot 2 requires 2 runite ores and 16 coal to make and gives 631 smithing experience. Rune ingot 3 requires 4 runite ores and 30 coal to make and gives 758 smithing experience. If comparing only burial armor grade levels against each other, the obvious choice would be to make ingot 1 rather than ingot 2 and 3 due to the amount of resources used per bar and more experience gained. For example, iron ingot 1 uses 1 iron ore and gives 101 experience, while iron ingot 2 uses 9 9 iron ores and gives 202 experience. Iron Ingot 2 uses 9 times more resources than Iron Ingot 1 and gives less experience in total. Making 9 Iron Ingot 1 would give 909 smithing experience compared to 1 Iron Ingot 2, which gives only 202 smithing experience. The cost and expenses is more as a result for higher grade ingots. However, the time taken to make burial armor takes quite a long time, approximately 4 minutes in inventory, or roughly 14 to 15 seconds per armor made. So the choice to decide is cost per ingot or time per choice. Now onto the comparison of ceremonial swords and burial armor. Starting off first is iron ingots. Iron Ingot 1 uses 1 iron ore, while Iron Ingot 4 uses 75 iron ore. To determine which one gives more experience, we first find the least common multiple between 1 and 75. The least common multiple of 1 and 75 is 75. Using this number gives an even amount of resources for both ingots, so they are proportional. Iron Ingot 1 gives 101 smithing experience each, so 75 quantities give 7,575 smithing experience total, while Iron Ingot 4 gives 3,242 smithing experience at 120%. Therefore, Iron Ingot 1 for burial armor is much better than Iron Ingot 4 for ceremonial swords. Iron Ingot 2 uses 9 iron ore and gives 202 smithing experience each. Finding the least common multiple of 9 and 75 is 225. 25 quantities of Iron Ingot 2 gives 5,050 smithing experience, while 3 quantities of Iron Ingot 4 give 9,726 smithing experience. Looking at the numbers, Iron Ingot 4 seems much better than Iron Ingot 2, however the experience is calculated at 120% each, which is an overestimated assumption. The problem with this is a perfect score on ceremonial swords is not always achieved. Usually an average score of 90% or higher is more likely, so we have to determine the minimum percentage needed for ceremonial swords. In order to find the minimum percentage, first find the smithing experience per 1%. This can be solved by taking the smithing perfect score experience and dividing by the percentage. The result is 27.017 smithing experience per 1% for Iron Ingot 4. Now we take this number and divide from the total experience of Iron Ingot 2. The minimum percentage needed is 63% for Iron Ingot 4 ceremonial swords each to earn more experience than Iron Ingot 2 burial armor, which means Iron Ingot 4 is better than Iron Ingot 2. Iron Ingot 3 uses 12 iron ores and gives 240 smithing experience each, and the least common multiple of 12 and 75 is 300. 12 quantities of Iron Ingot 3 gives 6,000 smithing experience, and 4 quantities of Iron Ingot 4 gives 12,968 smithing experience at 120%. Finding the minimum percentage needed for Iron Ingot 4 to earn more experience than Iron Ingot 3 is 56%. So Iron Ingot 4 ceremonial swords is better than Iron Ingot 3 burial armor if earning more than 56% or higher. Next is steel ingots. A steel ingot 1 uses 1 iron ore and 2 coal, while a steel ingot 4 uses 40 iron ores and 80 coal. The least common multiple between 1 and 40 is 40. The amount of smithing experience steel ingot 1 gives is 131, and 40 quantities gives 5,240 smithing experience compared with steel ingot 4 perfect score, which gives 4,538 smithing experience. Therefore, steel ingot 1 burial armor is better than steel ingot 4 ceremonial swords in terms of smithing experience. Steel Ingot 2 uses 4 iron ores and 7 coal and gives 253 smithing experience. The least common multiple between 4 and 40 is 40, so 10 quantities of Steel Ingot 2 gives a total experience of 2,530. Now to find the minimum percentage needed to earn more experience than Steel Ingot 2 with Steel Ingot 4. The smithing experience per 1% for Steel Ingot 4 is 37.817. Dividing the smithing experience from Steel Ingot 2 by the percentage per 1% equals to 67%. This means Steel Ingot 4 ceremonial swords is better than Steel Ingot 2 burial armor if earning 67% or higher. One Steel Ingot 3 uses 9 iron ore and 17 coal and gives 354 smithing experience. The least common multiple between 9 and 40 is 360, so 40 quantities of Steel Ingot 3 gives 14,160 smithing experience total, while 9 quantities of Steel Ingot 4 gives 40,842 smithing experience at 120%. The minimum percentage needed for Steel Ingot 4 to earn more experience than Steel Ingot 3 is 42%. Therefore, Steel Ingot 4 ceremonial swords is better than Steel Ingot 3 burial armor if 42% or higher is earned. Next up is mithril ingots. Mithril Ingot 1 uses 1 mithril ore and 4 coal and gives 164 smithing experience. Mithril Ingot 4 uses 30 mithril ores and 120 coal. The least common multiple between 1 and 30 is 30. From 30 quantities of Mithril Ingot 1 gives a total of 4,920 smithing experience, and compared with 1 Mithril Ingot 4 gives 5,446 smithing experience at 120%. Now to find the minimum percentage needed for Mithril Ingot 4 to earn more experience than Mithril Ingot 1. Dividing the perfect score experience by the percentage equals to 45.383 smithing experience per 1%. Using the smithing experience from Mithril Ingot 1 and dividing by the smithing percentage equals to 109%. Since 109% is not possible, a perfect score of 120% is always needed to earn more experience than Mithril Ingot 1. Thus, Mithril Ingot 4 is only better if a perfect score is always achieved. Mithril Ingot 2 uses 3 mithril ores and 12 coal and gives 316 smithing experience. The least common multiple between 3 and 30 is 30, so 10 quantities of Mithril Ingot 2 gives 3,160 smithing experience. Now to find the minimum percentage needed for Mithril Ingot 4 to earn more experience than Mithril Ingot 2. The minimum percentage needed is 70% for Mithril Ingot 4. This means Mithril Ingot 4 Ceremonial Swords is better than Mithril Ingot 2 Burial Armor if 70% or higher is achieved. Mithril Ingot 3 uses 6 mithril ores and 24 coal, giving 404 smithing experience. The least common multiple between 6 and 30 is 30, so 5 quantities of Mithril Ingot 3 gives 2,020 smithing experience. Once again, we have to find the minimum percentage needed for Mithril Ingot 4 to earn more experience than Mithril Ingot 3. The minimum percentage needed is 45% for Mithril Ingot 4. Thus, Mithril Ingot 4 Ceremonial Swords is better than Mithril Ingot 3 Burial Armor if 45% or higher is achieved. Next up is Adamant Ingots. An Adamant Ingot 1 requires 1 adamantite ore and 6 coal and gives 278 smithing experience, while an Adamant Ingot 4 uses 25 adamantite ores and 150 coal. The least common multiple between 1 and 25 is 25, so 25 quantities of Adamant Ingot 1 gives 6,950 smithing experience compared to an Adamant Ingot 4 which gives 6,873 smithing experience at 120%. This means Adamant Ingot 1 Burial Armor is better than Adamant Ingot 4 Ceremonial Swords in terms of experience. Adamant Ingot 2 requires 3 adamantite ores and 14 coal and gives 455 smithing experience. The least common multiple between 3 and 25 is 75, so 25 quantities of Adamant Ingot 2 gives 11,375 smithing experience total, while 3 quantities of Adamant Ingot 4 gives 20,619 smithing experience at 120%. Now we determine the minimum percentage needed for Adamant Ingot 4 to earn more experience than Adamant Ingot 2. The smithing experience per 1% is 57.275 for Adamant Ingot 4. Calculating the minimum percentage needed equals to 67% for Adamant Ingot 4 compared to Adamant Ingot 2. Therefore, Adamant Ingot 4 Ceremonial Swords is better than Adamant Ingot 2 Burial Armor if earning 67% or higher. Adamant Ingot 3 uses 4 adamantite ores and 22 coal and gives 568 smithing experience. The least common multiple between 4 and 25 is 100, so 25 quantities of Adamant Ingot 3 gives 14,200 smithing experience total, while 4 quantities of Adamant Ingot 4 gives 27,492 smithing experience at 120%. Now we find the minimum percentage needed for Adamant Ingot 4 to earn more experience than Adamant Ingot 3. The minimum percentage is 62%, which means Adamant Ingot 4 Ceremonial Swords is better than Adamant Ingot 3 Burial Armor if 62% or higher is earned. Last and finally is Rune Ingots. Rune Ingot 1 requires 1 runite ore and 8 coal and gives 505 smithing experience compared to Rune Ingot 4 using 18 runite ores and 144 coal and gives 8,558 smithing experience at 120%. The least common multiple of 1 and 18 is 18, so 18 quantities of Rune Ingot 1 gives a total of 9,090 smithing experience, which is more than 1 Rune Ingot 4. Therefore, Rune Ingot 1 Burial Armor is better than Rune Ingot 4 Ceremonial Sword. Rune Ingot 2 requires 2 runite ores and 16 coal while giving 631 smithing experience. The least common multiple between 2 and 18 is 18, so 9 quantities of Rune Ingot 2 gives 5,679 smithing experience total, which is less than 1 Rune Ingot 4 at 120%. Now to determine the minimum percentage needed for Rune Ingot 4 to earn more experience in Rune Ingot 2. The smithing experience per 1% is 71.317 for Rune Ingot 4. Dividing the smithing experience from Rune Ingot Ingot 2 by the percentage per 1% equals 80%. This means Rune Ingot 4 Ceremonial Swords is better than Rune Ingot 2 Burial Armor if 80% or higher is achieved. Rune Ingot 3 requires 4 runite ores and 30 coal and gives 758 smithing experience. The least common multiple between 4 and 18 is 36. So 9 quantities of Rune Ingot 3 gives a total of 6,822 smithing experience compared to 2 quantities of Rune Ingot 4, which gives 17,116 smithing experience. Like before, we find the minimum percentage needed to earn more experience for Rune Ingot 4 than Rune Ingot 3. The minimum percentage needed is 48% or higher for Rune Ingot 4. Therefore, Rune Ingot 4 Ceremonial Swords is better than Rune Ingot 3 Burial Armor if 48% or higher is achieved. So to wrap up my analysis, is Ceremonial Swords better than Burial Armor? The answer is yes in terms of experience for Ingots 2 and 3 for Burial Armor, but not for Ingot 1. Even though Ceremonial Swords require more resources, the experience overall is greater. Making Ceremonial Swords can be quite fast and forging the sword is not too difficult. However, the difference between the two is that Ceremonial Swords require concentration and attention, while Burial Armor is relaxing with less focus. So that concludes my analysis on Ceremonial Swords and Burial Armor, and as always, thanks for watching and have an awesome day.